Alright, so this is going to be a really long video of mostly me just making a custom wand, or a special edition wand anyways. I don't know if it's custom, as it's not ordered specifically for anybody. Um, but I'm just going to pop in with some occasional narration on what I'm doing. And right now I just kind of figured out what two woods I wanted to use, and kind of chucking up a piece of maple, and this is going to be the shaft of the wand, and the handle is going to be a Jatoba, or a Brazilian cherry. And I'm going to kind of really just have fun with this, doing some fancier work with the handle, a little bit more than just a standard shape, as well as doing some wood burning and some carving as well. Um, so yeah, like I said, this is going to be really long, and feel free to fast forward. I think most of the clips are sped up to 400 or 500% of normal speed. Um, there was more than 3.5 hours of footage for this, and I've got it edited down and then sped up so that it's at least it's under an hour. I think it's around 40 something minutes. Um, but yeah, if you have any questions about the process, make sure you comment below, and I'll jump in with the occasional um, audio commentary. Right now, all I've done is just rounded the maple, to a good round, and then I'm about to get this chucked up in my jaws. Um, the first thing that I have to do is to get the start of the shaft down to pretty close to the size that I want it for, the actual wand shaft size. And the problem with working these long, skinny shafts like this is, the longer they are, the more they flex. When they start getting thin, they actually flex, and that causes really bad chatter, where it's basically, as it's rotating, it bounces off of off of the chisels. And so the way that I've found to get around this, for those of you who are woodworkers and have problems with turning wands, I've seen some wand videos where the wands that they turn are, they're kind of chunky, and I get these down to, I've got them down to like 1/4 of an inch. In diameter, so that's really thin. Usually I try to work right around 3/8 of an inch, or about the size of a Sharpie, no bigger than a Sharpie on the shaft. That's the goal for my wand holsters. So the way that I found to kind of keep that from flexing is that the more wood you have sticking out, the more it's going to bow and flex. So I've got these jaws here, and I'll get these, pretty. Right now I'm centering it as close as I can, making sure that I can get as little play out of it as possible. And then once I have that shaft, the first 3 or so inches of that shaft work down to the right size, I'll actually start feeding the wand into the jaws, and I'll do this in sections so that I only end up with a few inches at a time. That's down to that thin 3/8 of an inch width. And what that allows me to do is retain enough thickness on the long part sticking out that I don't get the flexing. And then as I trim it down to size, I just continue moving that farther inside the jaw, so I've got less and less. And it only goes in, maybe 6 or 8 inches, probably around 6 inches or so of the blade of the wand, that I can fit up inside the jaws, which is, fine. Honestly, none of my wands I don't think any of them are 16 inches long. Most of the wand shafts are 10-ish inches or so, and then the handles are around 4. So, depending on how the wood feels, and what I'm working with and that kind of thing, I'll end up with a wand somewhere between 12 inches at the shortest, usually 13 or 14, up to 15. I've done some that are 16. I think that they're a little bit too big at that point, and unless it's a really large person handling them. As you can see, I got that turned down to the same diameter as the front, and so I just slid it a little bit farther into the jaws, and I'm going to work this next section down as well. So and it goes pretty much the same as before. Uh, you'll see that I'm hitting this with a sanding block as it's spinning, and what I'm trying to do is just take out as much variation as I can between each section. One of the downsides of chucking this up like this is every time that you release the jaws and move it, this is not uh, machining equipment for like metal and stuff, and the wood is going to flex and stuff. So every time I reposition it, just slightly changes the center, and the farther away you get towards the end that's not in the jaws, the more you can see that. And so I'm trying to minimize that as much as possible. Um, so I work all those sections together now. What I'm trying to do is just make sure that I've got a good, even, smooth shaft all the way down. The flexing isn't such a big deal with a sandpaper. You can sand it without a problem. But the chisels, once they start cutting, that's when you get the chatter. So that's what I'm doing here is I'm evening up and getting a good, even, smooth transition between all the sections that I've just turned and cleaning those up. I usually don't go down below 150 grit. I try to, keep it 220 and higher. It just, anytime that you go down on your sanding grits, it's just a lot more work. Um, because you start with a 150 and then I go to the 220, and then I've got a 300 and then some fine pads before I go to burnishing, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. Um, for this wand, this is going to be a two-piece wand, and so what I'm doing right now is bringing the little spindle in that's going to go inside the handle. I've got to put shape that little tenon on there so that it'll fit in the handle nicely. I've got a little jig that I've made out of an old wrench that I usually use for this, and that's what that is. And I'm going to kind of clean and smooth that up, make it the length that I want. And then once I have that done, then I kind of like to put on these sort of a teardrop shape right at the base of the blade of the wand, right where it meets the handle. And I'm going to use a lot of sword terminology here. I see the wands are very similar to swords. In their construction, there's some differences, and I have a stage combat background, so I use a lot of the same terminology when I talk about the blade of the wand or the grip or the pommel. Um, it doesn't, well, unless I'm doing like the dueling wands where I actually have wire work and stuff on there, and they look like little miniature swords. The only difference is that this doesn't have like quillions and the cross guard part. It's just more of a transition between the blade and the handle. There's a transitional area there, and so for this one, what I'm doing now is shaping that transition. I usually put like a little uh, teardrop shape where it gets kind of fat right before it goes into the handle, where the transition on the handle is, and so that's what I'm shaping now, using some different tools for that. So this is a detail spindle gouge that I'm using to get that shaped up. Okay, now that I've got the general shape that I want, I'm going to go in and do my basic sanding on this, where I make sure and take out any little, divots or variations. Um, and like I said, I go through several different grits and different sanding blocks on, the straight parts, and then just hand hold it for the the rounded parts to get them all nice and even. And it takes quite a while to do. But yeah, I go through, right. I don't know if you can see it. There's a 150. This is a 150 grit here. So I'm taking that out as best I can, um, and then shaping that teardrop shape. And then I will transition through all the different grits. Right now, every time that I finish a grit, I try to stop it and then do a final sand with the grain, as opposed to when it's spinning or sanding across the grain, and that puts the scratches across the grain. Um, but each time I finish with a certain grit, I'll stop the lathe and do a sand with the grain, and that really takes out all of those cross scratches that go against the grain. And I'm doing the same here with the 220 after I did the 150, and I'm just going along the grain instead of across it. So then I'll move to the finer 300 grit paper here. It goes a little faster when you get to the finer grit papers. It takes a little bit less time, but um, you know the blade itself goes fairly quickly because it's pretty even, and it's fairly easy to sand, and the handle takes a lot longer. So I'm just about done with that. And again, going with the grain on the 300 grit, and then we'll go to, this is my little soft fine sanding pad that I use, and then now I'm burnishing. And I do a preliminary burnish with just wood shavings. So you're just basically squeezing that on there, and that um, kind of compresses the grain. You get almost a polish from that, and then I've got another tool I'll use for that as well, and you'll see that later. Um, this is over at the sander, and what I'm doing is I'm tapering the end. I've got a little block set up there so I can get kind of a regular um, transition on it. And I just hand rotate this. It's not perfect, like if you can do it on the lathe, but the problem with that, with doing it the way with the putting the end of the wand inside the jaws, is you can't shape it that way, because it's in the jaws, and tapers get really difficult to do. If it's tapered, it doesn't sit in the jaw correctly. So you can't really do that in the jaws very well. And for this, I'm just doing a gentle taper on probably about the last 3 inches of the wand. And I found that doing it by hand really is fine, and I've gotten pretty good at it. I mean, it's not going to be perfectly centered every time, but to the naked eye, it's pretty darn good. So once I get get it roughed in on the belt sander, disc sander, then I come over to the drill press and I use these flap wheels, and I go for a 240 and a 320 grit, and then this is a block of hardwood that I'm using, and I'm actually burnishing this by hand, and it's just rubbing the hardwoods together, um, and then that polishes it up. And here I'm going to work on the handle. This is the Jatoba wood, and in order to do, I'm going to make sort of a castle shape tines on the end, the transition between the handle and the little teardrop shape on the blade. And so the way I do that is I find center, um, and then I mark holes on all four sides, and then I'm going to drill um, holes through all the way through, and I'm marking those in. I think these are around 3/4 inches from the end, um, and you'll see when I cut those off that leaves the little castle shape. So get my drill bit set up here, and then I'll drill those two holes, and you'll see that. Okay, I got those holes drilled in, and now I'm back at the lathe, and I'm just setting up center on this as well. This is always tough because um, when it's in a square block like this and you haven't turned it to the round yet, um, center is determined by where you put it on the spurs, and it may not be perfectly centered to the rest of it. And I think this one, if you look really close when it's finished, you can see that the tines are just a slightly different size, and that's just because the center right here, when I turn this down, is not perfectly in center with the holes that I drilled, but it's pretty darn close. Um, Again, if I was working with machining tools with a metal lathe and I was making parts out of metal, the tolerances are a lot smaller there, and also doesn't flex nearly as bad as wood. It's a lot easier to get that set up. So, but here, anyways, I'm just getting the blank into the round, kind of getting that smoothed up, and then that way I'll be able to get this in the jaws, the chuck jaws, so that I can get that end cut off and leave those little tines on the end there. You'll see that here shortly. And this is where I'm really trying to make sure that I can get this just absolutely as center as I can, and just loosen the jaws and use the spur on the end there to dead center it. And then once I've got it centered, now I have to drill the hole for the tenon to fit into, and I've got my little drill chuck that goes on there. And I got that nice and centered up, and then we're gonna drill into this. Now, keep in mind everything on the end past the holes is going to get cut off. I'm only going to save half of the holes, so that's going to give me that little castle shape when I cut it off. You'll see, but so I have to drill in beyond the holes the same distance as the tenon of my shaft, and so that's why I keep holding it up there as I marked, where the drill actually got to the bottom of the holes. Now I'm just checking the size to make sure that my tenon is going to fit nicely into the hole I've just drilled. Um, but that all seemed to work out well, and so now I'm going to chuck this up and cut the end off, and that right now it's really thin where those holes are drilled. There's not a lot of wood left, and so I'm kind of marking where the cut's going to be, and I'm always afraid that it's going to just break and fly off. And I mean, I have face protection and stuff, and the pieces of wood are pretty small, so there's not short of getting it in my eye, I don't think it would really cause me a lot of damage. But it's always nerve-wracking when you're working with power tools and you have a piece come flying off at you. So but I'll work this with a skew, and then eventually once I get it close, I opt to just go with the little handsaw and cut that off. So you'll see that. Yeah, there was just very, very tiny little pieces holding that on, and so I just nipped it off with the saw there. So now you see that castle shape that I've got, and I now have to hollow this out to fit the bottom of the teardrop on the blade of the wand where that is going to go in there. So it has to be the same shape. So that takes a little bit of fiddling and fitting and seeing what needs to be cut out and smoothed out and stuff. And you'll see me like fitting it right here, seeing what needs to be continued to cut out. And I apologize for the head in the way. I need to find a better place to get this camera. There's not a lot of room between the wall, so it's not the best angle, and I think I cover up a lot of things this whole video, so I apologize. I'll work on that for the next one for those of you who are interested. But starting to come together there. You can kind of see how that's going to fit in, and then I'll continue to shape that here. Here I think I've got the final shape done. I'm just kind of sanding, the in between the tines and getting those smoothed up and ready to work. Um, and I tried to put this tailstock on there, the little drive on the tailstock, and I just don't like the way that the shape of my tailstock is fitting into the tines. And I'm going to mark it out and get the wand shape where I'm at, but as I'm working on it right here, I can see right away that the tines are just going to be a problem with that spur drive. So what I need to do is make a piece of wood that is going to be a throwaway. That what I'm going to do is shape it the same as the bottom of the teardrop, so that it can go in between those tines, and that wood will be supported. So if I start pressing on it, I don't break those little tines off. So I'm just using a scrap piece of Purple Heart from another project, and I'm fitting that into the tines so that I can get the pressure off of the tips and down into the handle itself, into that hole that I've drilled. And so I'm kind of working a small piece of tin in there and then making the curve so that it fits and doesn't put pressure on the outside tips of those tines. That way I don't snap those off when I clamp it in. All right, got a nice fit there finally. And I'm rechucking the handle back. I kind of marked exactly where it was so I could keep it as center as possible. And I'm changing to a crown um, drive there on my tailstock. And you can see I put that piece of Purple Heart in there. It was already set up, with center and everything on it. That's why I used it. And that fits down inside the tines, nice and snugly, so I don't have any wobble or play there. So I don't break my tines off when I start cutting this in. And I'm using the skew chisel to mark the measurements that I've got on there so that they're nice and deep. That way, because I'm kind of truing this up nice and round, and I can still see my lines of where I want my transitions to go. Because I have transitions between the pommel and the handle, and then what would be the cross guard or quillions, between the handle and the blade of the wand, where I try to put some nice decorative beads or coves or different shapes like that. This one I'm just doing taking that simple crown shape and bringing that down, and then I'll put a bead above it, and then you'll see the handle kind of take shape here in a moment. So using a detail spindle gouge to make those beads, and getting that all shaped up. If I can find a better position for this camera and get a little bit closer, um, it's kind of hard to see exactly what I'm doing because I'm doing such small detail, thin shavings and stuff right here. Um, Now move back to the skew. Skew. A lot of people are afraid of the skew chisel. I'm kind of an in between. I really like the way that it works, but the skew that I have is a really big, thick, bulky skew, and I think it's for doing larger pieces than what I'm working on with these wands. I need to get some more tools, um, but it's just a big, thick beast, and it works really well on some things, and then I just prefer going to that detail gouge when I'm working in the little small beads and stuff in. Right now I'm just kind of tapering that handle and getting that set up. Here I'm shaping the pommel to be, sort of little, not quite an acorn shape. It's more of a reverse acorn instead of being rounded to a convex cave. It's more of a concave, and you'll see that in the final wand. But I kind of want the handle to be the same on both sides, to be, a little bit fatter towards the center, and then taper to the, between the pommel and the cross guards there. And I'm just evening that out as best I can with the skew chisel. And making that a nice even and symmetrical taper. So I do some where the it tapers fat towards the top, and some where it tapers towards the bottom. This one it's tapered towards the center, and then it transitions to the same thickness on either end of the grip itself. So um, just working that pommel nut down to a more even shape here. Okay, that was just inspecting everything. I was pretty happy with the shape. So now I'm going to do a preliminary wire burn on the in between. I like to use the wire to burn that transition in. Um, where I right at the edges of the beads, it kind of puts a nice clear um, line there. And then I decided to go with doing some creative burning on this. And I use a friction burn sometimes, or the torch, and I use the friction burn at the top there. The friction burn is a lot easier to control because it only burns where you're touching wood to wood. Um, but for large areas, I find that it looks uneven. So I'll use the torch on that. Right now I'm just going to sand out and make sure that I got a nice smooth taper all the way down that handle. And then you'll see me pull the torch out and work on that handle. Sanding all the little curves and stuff is always difficult. Is you really have to get into all the little cracks and crevices and stuff. So, but again, this was just a preliminary sand because once you burn it, it's going to change the grain anyway, so you have to resand it. But you can see now I'm using the torch and just enough to blacken the surface without catching fire. Sometimes it'll catch fire, but you have to be really careful in that torch because, again, I'm not trying to burn the whole part. I'm trying. There's a bead there between the crown and the handle that I'm trying to keep the natural Jatoba color. But Jatoba just really has a really nice even tone when you burn it, whether it's friction or torch, and it just looks really pretty. Um, so that's what I'm trying to do here. And that torch heats up the beads a little bit, and so that burn kind of goes over to the beads. And so what I'm trying to do now is sand the charring off the areas where I don't want it on the beads. I decided to try using the detail gouge to actually cut off some of that it wasn't as black as the handle, but it did darken the wood a little bit, where it's just starting to turn colors. And so I'm going to take that back off, and get a nice clean line there, so that you get multiple colors out of it. You get the nice dark crown and handle, and then this nice natural Jatoba brown. And then when I do the carving, that brown will come through in the carving as well. That'll show through the black. So again, a whole section here where it's really hard to see what I'm doing, and I'm just sanding, so it's nothing terribly exciting, but I'm just trying to get that sandpaper in between all the little crevices and get a nice smooth. I really like that natural wood look. I don't finish my wood with polyurethane or anything like that. I finish with just oils and wax, because I really like that natural wood look as much as possible. And so to get that shine, it does mean that I have to spend more time sanding, and just making sure that I can take out like all the scratches and just burnish it so that the wood should have a natural shine in itself. And that way the oil and wax that I put on there is more of a protective coat, and you just get the wood as naturally as I know how to make it anyway. This is my burnishing block that I'm using. It's just a piece of walnut, and I'm just rubbing it. And if you hold it in one place and push harder, that's where you get your friction burn. If you don't push quite as hard and you move it fast, that's where you get your burnishing, and that really kind of shined it up. Um, but I felt like on the handle there, it kind of left some marks that were going across the grain, and so I decided to go ahead and resand that with my really fine sandpaper again, and take those marks out, and then I'll hand burnish it. That goes going with the grain instead of spinning it later. But I like to make these videos. I have two computer screens, and when I'm watching TV, I'll watch TV or something, and then on my other screen, I actually have YouTube up quite a bit, and I'll find these long videos like this where I'm watching wood turning or making just all kinds of maker videos. And if it gets to a part that's interesting, I'll pause my movie or whatever and turn the volume up. Um, but most of the time I just watch them on silent. I don't know how many of y'all do that, but I'm making a commentary on here for the few of you who actually want to watch the whole thing through and listen to what I'm doing. Um, but yeah, now I'm finalizing those, getting nice clean burn rings on there with a wire on the sides of my beads, and then I'm going to cut that off and check that for the wand fit. And you actually can kind of see how this is all going to go together now. And now I've got to finish that off where I cut the pommel nut off of the scrap wood there, and I'm just smoothing that up on the really quick on the belt sander, getting that blocked in and nice and even. And then again, I go to the flap wheels here where I can get my nice final super smooth 320 grit, before I burnish it. And I just switch between the 220 and the 320, and get that all nice and smooth. And then I'll do a final burnish on this, and then it looks like I'll be ready to glue that up. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to set this up so that I can actually put in this little piece of scrap here that I've got carved out into a cup, and that's going to go on the pommel nut. And then I kind of clamp in the wand shaft, and I kind of center it up first, and then I've got that little scrap on the pommel nut, and that seems to be nice and straight. It's not going to be perfectly straight. If you look really close, there's just the tiniest bit of a variation once it's glued up. But again, we're not working with the tolerances of machinist tools, so it's really difficult to get it absolute perfectly dead straight on any of this. But like I said, to the naked eye, unless you're measuring it, it looks pretty good. So I'm just using a good wood glue here, putting this together, and I'm going to clamp this up, and then it has to sit for at least an hour. I think the next step is when I'm going to do my burning and carving anyways. So I'm going to get this clamped in. I'm just going to make sure that my fit's good. I'm getting it aligned where I want. And then this is where I actually put the pressure to it. And I got to clean out. I had a little bit of too much glue that squeezed out. And so I have to clean up that glue. I'm just kind of digging just the little tiny bit of glue that squeezed out of there. Um, and then once that's all cleaned off, I'll let it sit and dry. All right, all that worked out well. Everything is dry now, and of course, obviously, nobody wants to sit and watch glue dry, so I cut that part out. And now all I'm doing is marking the handle, and I'm kind of just going to do sort of a jagged, lightning bolty, sort of crackly effect in the handle here. And for doing the handle is a lighter brown than the burn. The burn is that dark black. And so to make it show on the handle, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a Dremel tool once I get my basic design sort of laid out where I want. And then I'll use the Dremel tool to come in and carve out all the little lines that I'm drawing on there right now. And which is kind of hard to see with my hand in the way at this angle. Um, but yeah, I'll get those carved in with the Dremel, and so that way you'll see that kind of rich brown color coming through the black of the handle. And then when I do the shaft, I go the opposite direction. As the shaft is nice white maple, and then I'll use a wood burner to burn a design into that. So I realized there was an awful lot there where you couldn't see anything, so I just cut that out. Basically, and you can kind of see now. The Dremel, I've just made all those little crackly marks, and I'm just smoothing those out, and getting all the little fringe off the edges with the sandpaper, and then burnishing that back up so that you can see the brown crackles coming through the handle there. Um, and then now I'm going to use a similar cupped piece on the other end just to put the tip of the wand in, and it just works really well as a workspace to hold the wand this way, because I can rotate it as I'm working around. And I just found that I have just some tiny little indentations where the jaws are on there. And that's one of the tough things about chucking this up like that is you do end up sometimes with that. So I'm taking those out with the burnishing tool. And now I'm just going to draw on a similar design onto the shaft of the wand, and then I'll do the wood burning in that as well. If you've made it this far in the video and you're actually listening to this, I'm pretty impressed. We're 40 minutes in, and that's a lot of just watching me work and jabber. So again, this is my watching me work and jabber on videos. But I don't know. I think it's interesting. I am going to put this wand on Etsy for sale. I'm just gonna, again, figure out how many hours I spent on it, and but I'm gonna have a separate listing for this, and I'll put that down in the description. But if you like seeing this kind of thing, make sure you like the video, subscribe, all that shameless self promotion at this point. And then make sure you check out the Etsy shop and see if I've still got this for sale. I think I'm going to do this more often, as I really enjoy doing these one-off wands, and then doing a work video. And I think there's a connection there. Um, when people see the actual piece start to finish, how it was made and what all that entails, even when it's 3.5 hours crunched down into 45 minutes. Um, it's still, it's really something to see, that, when you own the final piece and you've seen it start to finish come out of just a wood block, and, it's this thing now. There's a real connection there between the maker and, the eventual owner of this. And I really enjoy doing videos and stuff like that. So I may do this more often, but I hope you like them. Um, Now I'm just wood burning, this sort of a lightning crackle effect up the shaft of the wand as well, to kind of tie everything together. And yeah, I have kind of cut some of this out again, partially because my hand obscures it, and honestly, this takes 20-30 minutes at least, if not longer, depending on the design and stuff, and it can be a little bit tedious. So I just have some cut effects in there so you can kind of see generally, what I'm doing, where you can see it better. And it's actually, I found it's really difficult to do this on the shaft because it's so thin, and it's hard to keep the wood burning tool on there without slipping off. So you have to put enough pressure that you're getting the burn in there. Um, Thinking about upgrading to a pyrography pen at some point. I do have several different tips for this, but after a while it gets hot in the hand. So um, that little cutout there was just, I just finalized the last little quarter of an inch of the tip, that I couldn't get to because it's in the chucks right now. Um, and it was hard, you couldn't see it, it was out of frame. So, but just continued that lightening, the last couple of little bits right there at the tip. And then now it's just a matter of getting it all sanded back smooth, getting any of the rough places around where the wood burning was, and then using the brushes to clean out all the excess char and stuff out of there, and getting it nice and clean. And then it'll be the final sand and polish, and then we'll move to finishing. So, like I said, when I finish this up, I just use, this is boiled linseed oil, and I'm just wiping this on. I like I like to get it as warm as possible, so I'm using friction. Use old socks or rags or whatever for working the linseed oil into the wood and giving it a chance to really soak up. And the heat is the best way to do that. And so I like to use friction. Sometimes when it's cold out, like it is up here in North Idaho right now, I'll use a torch and just really quickly go back and forth over it and just heat that oil up. And what I'm trying to do is just get it to get nice and thin so that the wood really absorbs that. Uh, then I'll let it sit for a while to absorb, and then I come in and I have a wax paste that I make. This is made out of a little bit of mineral oil. You heat it up, and then I use a combination of beeswax. I know a lot of woodworkers use just beeswax, but I like to use beeswax and carnauba wax. Carnauba wax is like, it makes an extremely hard finish, and so I find it to be nice and protective. And so this blend works really well. And this is the first time that I've tried this particular mix that I've made, and it's a little bit on the firm side, but I think it's partially just because it's so cold right now. Um, but once I rub it with the cloth, it does make a nice little paste and just wipes out nicely. Um, and then I could work that into the wood as well. And then I can, any little bits that once I heat it up like this, it just melts the wax, and it which also absorbs into the wood, and that gives that nice protective solid finish that'll last for years. Um, and then I'll wipe off any excess and polish that up. And this is just about done. This finish has to sit overnight, to make sure that it's everything is nice and set. And then once everything hardens, the wax hardens, and get it out of all the little nooks and crannies and stuff, all the excess. Um, I'll wipe it down. Then what I'll do is I'll go to the buffing wheel, and I've just got a buffing wheel that's it's got a drill chuck. It's for polishing cars and stuff, a wool wheel, and I'm gonna work that wax and stuff into the ends there that were in the chucks, and everything looks pretty good. Pretty happy with the final product there. And then the next day, I just come in, and this is a pretty quick process. Matter of fact, this is only 200 speed instead of like 400 or 500 like some of the other clips. But yeah, it's just this is just heating up. The buffing wheel is just heating up the surface wax just slightly. It gets a nice shine on it, but it's not thick. You don't have that polyurethane coat, which on some things looks good, but for me, I just love that natural wood feel, and you can see the shine really coming out on that handle. But again, it also means that for maintenance and stuff, it's really easy just to buff and clean up, or you can use furniture wax or something to polish it. Um, but yeah, really happy with the way this turned out. It's got a nice smooth clean look to it. It's got both Dremel carving and wood burning on it, two colors of wood. And so I just have taken this up to the photo studio, and I've done some shots for Etsy. And here's the final product. Jatoba wood handle with burning, so you get the dark black burnt areas as well as that nice rich brown Jatoba wood, and then maple handle, or maple blade on that goes into the handle there, and then that's all burned. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think of the video, and make sure you check this out on Etsy. Thanks for watching.